Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. Today is the 15th day of April, 2022. I'm going to be reading from a book that I mentioned earlier tonight, a book by Kenneth W. Royce, Royce is his last name. It's called A Hologram of Liberty, the Constitutional Shocking Alliance with Big Government. This book was published back probably in, I think it's 2010. Maybe a little bit before then. Let's see if I'm correct and wrong here. No, this is 2012. I think this book came out. I bought this book in 2014. Actually, in 2014, I went to a gathering of what I call conservative people, and I was horrified by the lack of knowledge, not just the lack of knowledge, but just people how they've been completely brainwashed in their belief systems. In other words, yeah, we need to vote. We need a president. It's like, already then I was already moving in that direction. Actually, I wasn't even voting anymore. So I'm going to start here on page 44 and read to page 47. I think it's key in how this all came together. And I'll start here first starting with what I call a quote from Ralph Borodzinski. His quote is called "The Constitution That Never Was." And I'm giving you an idea that how would I say it? A framework is to look at what's happened, how other different authors look at certain things to give you an idea. And this is what I would call something that's a way of how this all started. And eventually, most are not aware there was a conference after they supposedly we beat the British. Who knows? I don't think we did. But anyway, we suddenly get this idea that simply is that the Articles of Confederation are not worthy. We need something better when they already had what they needed right then. They had freedom. So this was I guess you would call it a conspiracy. And that's what I'm going to share with you what he shares. Okay, here we go. The lawyers in charge of the Constitutional Congress were undeterred. In February 1781, they submitted to the states an amendment vesting in Congress the power to levy a duty of 5% on imported goods. This and other similar amendments were rejected by the states. Under the Confederation, the federal government had no means of enforcing obedience to its laws because they operated upon states and not upon their inhabitants. You cannot imprison a state if it breaks the law. If an attempt is made to seize its goods, a state militia can repel that action. The lawyers had a plan. That plan was they would make the national government operative upon individuals instead of the states. If a person defied the law, he could be imprisoned or have a levy placed upon his property until he conformed. And that's a quote from Ralph Borodzinski. So, great work behind the scenes was done to foment a panic over the overstated crisis at hand. Our weak government not only attracts invaders, but cannot effectively muster a viable defending army. The weak Congress cannot protect the nation from more powerful nations or Indians, so we directly need to strengthen Congress, create the problem, create opposition to the problem, offer your solutions. This is a classic Hegelian doctrine so well suited or used by the communists. Many folks were having none of it and vigorously opposed it, challenged the very existence of a crisis. A year later, in June 1788, warning against adopting a constitution, Patrick Henry said, I'll quote it, "The Confederation, the same despised government, merits, in my opinion, the highest economy. It carries us through a long and dangerous war. It rendered us victorious in that bloody conflict with a powerful nation. It has secured us a territory greater than any monarch possesses, and shall a government which has been thus strong and vigorous be accused of imbecility and abandoned for want of energy. Great danger, allegedly, would ensue if the Virginian Convention rose without adopting the Constitution. I ask, where is that danger? I see none." So this is what's going on, is the approval of the Constitution. And this is the statement that Patrick Henry speaking, because he opposes it. In fact, he said earlier before he was asked to come to the Philadelphia Convention, he said, "I smell a rat." He would not participate. He knew something was wrong. He's the only one I think that stood out in this way. But anyway, let's go on. Why then tell us of dangers to terrify us into adoption of this new government? This is the whole same game plan. It's always using fear. That's my quote. Okay, that's what I'm saying. They use fear in order to get what they want. And yet, who knows the dangers that this new system may produce? They are out of the sight of the common people. They cannot foresee latent consequences. In other words, they cannot see foresight in the future. I dread the operation of it on the middling and lower class of people. It is for them I fear the adoption of the system. I see great jeopardy in this new government. I see none from our present one. So he's very much for the Articles of Confederation. He doesn't want to have a powerful central government. Public and private security are to be found here in the highest degree. Sir, if the fortune of a free people not to be intimidated by imaginary dangers. Fear is the passion of slaves. That's what he says, Thomas. Okay, so that's from Patrick Henry. I was about to say Thomas Paine. So I noted historians agreed that the Articles of Confederation were rather unfairly criticized. In retrospect, it may appear that the Americans lacked vision when they failed to establish a more tightly knit union and to create a strong central government. But it must be remembered that they had just fought a war against centralized authority, and with limited communications and transportation facilities, they had good reason to believe that there could be no self-government except through local government. Tip O'Neill made that analogy in the past. This is me making a comment. All politics is our local. That's where it starts. Nor should the accomplishments of the government under the Articles of Confederation be overlooked. It successfully brought the war to a conclusion, negotiated the Treaty of Paris of 1783, which gave the United States de jure status as a nation. Not de facto, but a de jure status as a nation. So it's a true point. Established an enduring system for the development of Western lands and refined the practice of interstate cooperation that gave Americans further practical experience in handling national problems. This is J.W. Pedersen, Understanding the Constitution. This is a quote from him. Now we're going to September 1786. September 1786, the Annapolis Convention. Most are unaware this happened. Okay, we're not taught this even in history. And yes, that turncoat, Mr. Hamilton, was enormously involved here. Alexander Hamilton was definitely involved. Urging the New York Assembly asked Congress in 1782 to call a general convention of the states to revise the articles. In other words, they were supposed to revise the articles. That was his contention, but that's not what they did. They done away with them. They were going to do away with them is what their idea was. The Massachusetts legislature seconded the request in 1785. Congress studied the proposal but was unable to reach any agreement. Then Virginia and Maryland in 1785 worked out a plan to resolve conflicts between the two states over navigation and commercial regulations. This gave Madison the idea of calling a general meeting on commercial problems. In January 1786, the Virginia Assembly called for a meeting in Annapolis. In September, this is based upon Ralph Mitchell, CQ Guide to the U.S. Constitution. Attended by only 12 delegates from only 5 states to discuss the commerce regulations, this convention had grander ideas. The idea of extending the power of convention delegates, which is what they were talking about, to other objects than those of commerce. In other words, that was just their introduction of basically what they wanted to do, the thinking, but that was not what they wanted. They wanted to make it larger than that. Was an improvement on the original plan and will deserve to be incorporated into that of a future convention. Again, this is only 5 states that are representing here. So you don't even have half the states that are actually involved here. We have been introduced to think that the power of regulating trade is of such comprehensive extent and will enter so far into the general system of the Confederate government that to give these commercial powers, so here we go with commerce, okay, may require a corresponding adjustment of other parts of the federal system. That's based upon the quote from September 14, 1786 in Annapolis. From a mere trade conference came the plan to demolish the Confederation under the guise of an adjustment. That's what they're saying. So in August of 1786, you wonder how this happened. We have two rebellions that take place after the United States has actually supposedly won the war. One was the Whiskey Rebellion that took place in southwestern part of Pennsylvania. The other one is Shays' Rebellion that took place in Massachusetts. After the Revolutionary War, Massachusetts, virtually controlled by the mercantile class, raised taxes to pay its war debt. While 7 states resorted to paper currency issued in various degrees, Massachusetts farmers had their cattle and land seized and were thrown into jail. In other words, they were not even able to pay for their taxes. After all, we just fought a nation that was basically doing the same thing, and yet, lo and behold, these people in Massachusetts, the lawyers, began to push their issue. All petitions for relief were ignored, and a flash fire rebellion resulted. I wonder if this was all created. Armed farmers prevented courts from opening and stopping seizures. Led by Daniel Shays, a decorated Revolutionary War captain, 1,100 men attacked the Springfield courthouse and federal arsenal. Although they were easily defeated by artillery fire and dispersed, the politicians panicked and hysterical accounts prevailed. To them, it seemed the beginning of the end. While the rebellion failed militarily, it caused a riot in the spring of 1787 election in Massachusetts. John Hancock defeated the inflexible Governor James Bowdoin, and 3/4 of the House members were replaced. Relief laws were enacted exempting clothing, household goods, and trade tools from seizure, and a pauper oath freed many imprisoned debtors. Taxes were significantly lower. Further rebellions were unnecessary. Similarly, though lesser resistance to debt and tax collection had also occurred in some other states, they being New Jersey, Maryland, Virginia, and South Carolina. However, Shays' rebellion was, as the French say, the drop that overflowed the vase. The vase. As Jefferson feared from Paris, a rather unjustified sense of alarm persuaded all states but Rhode Island to endorse the 1786 Annapolis call for another convention in May of 1787 in Philadelphia. So what's taking place simply is these leaders have stoked the fire. They stoked the fire in order to basically to create something in the near future. Let me finish up here. Most troublesome to the framers of the Constitution was the increasingly insurgent spirit evident among the people. Fearing the popular takeover of state governments, the wealthy class looked to a national government as a means of protecting their interests. Even in states where they were inclined to avoid strong federation, the rich, once faced with the threat of popular rule and realizing that if political lines with conservatives from other states would be a safeguard if the radicals should capture the state government, gave up state rights for nationalism without hesitation. This is a quote from Michael Perini, Democracy for the Few, 5th edition. Madison himself admitted years later that souring credit status, which threatened the economy's status quo, it's always about the money, folks, always about the money, contributed more to that uneasiness which produced the Constitution and prepared the mind for a general reform than any inadequacies of the Confederation. So, as we would say, or it wasn't the principle after all, it was the money. And that's what was driving this whole thing, because a lot of this had to do with clearly the United States owed a war debt. And how are they going to be able to paid that debt. That debt was probably at that point, what I've been told, was around $6 million to $8 million. That was to France. What eventually becomes, and a few years later, is transferred to England. Somehow the bankers apparently got involved and gave the United States 7 years to pay off their debts, but they increased it to $18 million. So what was $6 million became $18 million. And the United States didn't have the money. And so the pressure was being put upon them to get a centralized federal government so that we can get the ball rolling and start taxing or getting money or make it be in a commerce here and do something about it. So it was all fear. So I'm just wondering simply, did this just happenstance or was this all planned? Some feel that simply it may have been all planned. We also wonder why the United States actually went to war when reality is that the things were not as bad as they were. And that we know that simply the men who dressed up in the Indian suits were actually some people who were actually trying to stoke the fire again, a rebellion and a war. So I just thought I'd share this with you. This is from Hologram of Liberty by Kenneth W. Royce. The Constitution's shocking alliance with the government. The idea simply is they're looking at a different perspective than KL and others see the Constitution itself as an economic tool, which they see he does too, but it's a different perspective. He's looking at it in a different framework. Anyway, I'm going to have to probably turn in here. It's getting pretty late for me, but I have done about 3 or 4 videos today, so I'm kind of talking myself out of it here. I hope that what I'm sharing with you would be knowledge that would help you to understand how we've gotten to this situation, this place that we are in this country. Again, the debt is not yours. You need to understand that. That's a corporation. That is not your. They're using your straw man, so to speak. And the media is pointing out, well, we're such and such $1 trillion in debt. That's not your debt. But they're going to paint it that way, and they've been doing that because they're sowing the seeds for that. That's what they're doing. I hope that you will glean knowledge and understand who you are. You are the authority, not them. That's why I always encourage people not to vote. When you vote, you're saying the system works. When you don't vote, you say the system's broken and you know it doesn't work. And you don't want to be a part of it because you know it's a big mess. Something must fall, must collapse in order to start over. So, wish you a good night. Again, I'm always interested in your feedback. Let me know what you think. And you have a good night. Thank you for listening.